The apartment smelled like fresh paint and dust, the kind of scent that clings to new places before they start feeling like home. I dropped the last moving box onto the floor, exhaling as I stretched my arms over my head. The room was bare, unfamiliar, but at least it was mine. After months of searching, I'd finally found a decent place in the city that didn't drain my entire bank account. The catch? The landlord failed to mention the thin walls. Because the second I set my keys down, I heard it, a deep, rich laugh, followed by a low murmur of conversation coming from the apartment next door. My new neighbor. I hadn't met him yet. But something about his voice made my pulse do something stupid. I shook my head, brushing the thought aside as I grabbed a water bottle from my bag. This wasn't a big deal. Just a normal apartment, just a normal neighbor. Nothing to overthink. But then, as I turned toward the window, I froze. Because standing on the balcony next to mine, shirtless, stretching like he just finished a workout, was him. Tall, toned, a light sheen of sweat on his skin like he'd just come in from a run. And he was looking right at me. A slow smirk tugged at his lips. New guy, huh? I swallowed. Hard. Because wow, okay. Yeah, I managed, forcing myself to act normal. Just moved in. He leaned against the railing, tilting his head slightly as he studied me. Like he was sizing me up. Welcome to the building, he said, that smirk still there. Hope you like noise. I blinked. Why? He chuckled, running a hand through his damp hair. Thin walls, man. I didn't get a chance to ask what that meant, because at that exact moment, a muffled sound came through my bedroom wall. A sound that made my brain short-circuit. A deep groan. Low. Rough. Definitely not innocent. My stomach dropped. My neighbor's smirk deepened. See what I mean, he said, his voice dropping slightly, like he was enjoying my reaction. I had no idea how to respond to that. But one thing was suddenly very, very clear. Living next to him was going to be a problem. I spent the next 20 minutes pretending like that didn't happen. Unpacking boxes. Drinking water. Literally anything to get my brain to move past the fact that my new neighbor had just casually exposed me to his, whatever that was. But ignoring it didn't work. Because the moment I sat on my bed, the wall struck again. This time, it wasn't just a groan. It was a voice. His voice. Muffled, low, but distinct. Yeah, just like that. I nearly choked on air. What the hell kind of apartment did I just move into? I shot a glance at the wall like it had personally offended me. Was this an everyday thing? Was I going to have to invest in noise-cancelling headphones just to survive? I groaned, dragging a hand down my face. What a story, right? And hey, don't forget to leave a like, it really helps. Plus, if you drop a comment below, it boosts the video even more. Thanks for the support, and now, let's get back to it. Focus. I forced myself back on my feet, heading for the kitchen. Food. That was the plan. Maybe I'd even knock on his door tomorrow, introduce myself like a normal neighbor. I grabbed a granola bar and leaned against the counter, my mind still running at 1,000 miles per hour. Then, another knock. Not on the wall. On my front door. I stiffened. Because there was only one person that could be. I hesitated for a second, then exhaled, running a hand through my hair before making my way over. I cracked the door open. And there he was. Standing in the hallway, shirtless, slightly damp, and holding 2 beers. I was so screwed. I froze. Because there he was, shirtless, standing in my doorway, holding 2 beers like this was the most normal thing in the world. Up close, he looked even better than he had on the balcony. Taller than I expected, broader too. His skin still had a slight sheen to it, like he'd just stepped out of the shower, and his damp hair fell slightly over his forehead. My brain refused to function properly. "I figured I should officially welcome you," he said, holding out a beer. I blinked at him. "You know it's midnight, right?" He just grinned. "You're awake, aren't you?" That was a good point. An annoyingly good point. I hesitated, my fingers twitching at my side. Letting him in? Probably a bad idea. But standing here, watching him smirk at me like he already knew what I was thinking? Worse. So before I could talk myself out of it, I stepped back and opened the door wider. His grin widened just slightly as he stepped inside. This was a mistake. The second the door clicked shut, the air shifted. It wasn't awkward. Not exactly. But it wasn't casual, either. He walked past me like he owned the place, eyes flicking around the apartment as if he was mentally rating it. Still pretty empty, he noted, cracking open his beer. I leaned against the counter, trying to act normal. "Haven't had time to unpack yet. Guess that means I'm your first visitor." I huffed out a quiet laugh, twisting my beer cap off. "Yeah, I guess you are. Big mistake." Because the moment I said it, he looked at me again, really looked. His smirk was still there, but now it was edged with something else. Something a little more dangerous. "First visitor, he?" He took a slow sip of his beer, eyes never leaving mine. "Should I be honored?" I rolled my eyes. "You should be lucky I didn't shut the door in your face." He chuckled, leaning against my counter. "Too close." "I don't think you would've," he murmured. My stomach flipped. Something about the way he said it, so confident, so sure, made my fingers tighten around the neck of my bottle. I took a sip, ignoring the way my throat suddenly felt dry. Keep it casual. Keep it normal. So, I cleared my throat. "You always knock on your neighbor's door in the middle of the night?" He smirked, setting his beer down. "Only when they're interesting." I had no idea what to say to that. The air buzzed. A slow, electric pull that made my pulse do something stupid. Then, as if testing something, he reached out, fingers brushing my wrist. Not an accident. Not a mistake. Just deliberate. The room suddenly felt too warm. My skin buzzed where he touched me. And I knew. This wasn't just a casual neighborly beer. This was something else. Something I should walk away from. But I didn't. I stayed exactly where I was, because for some reason, I wanted to see what he would do next. I should have pulled away. Should have stepped back, broken the moment before it got worse. But I didn't. His fingers were still there, barely touching my wrist, but enough for me to feel it. Enough for my pulse to betray me. Ethan was watching me now, his smirk faded, replaced with something else, something unreadable. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. "You always get this friendly with your new neighbors?" His lips twitched. "Only the interesting ones." There it was again. That word. I exhaled slowly, pulling my hand back, but not fast enough to miss the way his fingers dragged just slightly as I moved. Like he was testing the waters. Seeing what I'd do. I stepped toward the counter, needing something solid between us. Needing space. He didn't follow, but his eyes stayed on me. He was enjoying this. Too much. I needed to turn the tables. Fast. "So," I said, crossing my arms, "is this your way of hazing the new guy? Invade his space, make him uncomfortable, then disappear back into your apartment?" Ethan let out a quiet laugh. "Uncomfortable?" He shook his head. "I don't think that's what's happening here." Oh, he was cocky. I tilted my head, mirroring his smirk. And what exactly is happening here, Ethan? His name felt weird on my tongue. Like I shouldn't be saying it yet. Ethan must have noticed because his smirk deepened. You tell me, he said smoothly. I scoffed. I wasn't going to let him win this. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the counter. Let's make it interesting. Ethan raised a brow. Oh? I grabbed the deck of cards from the corner of the counter, the one I hadn't even unpacked yet. He watched as I set it between us. You play poker? I asked. A slow smirk curved his lips. What, you want to gamble against me? I shrugged. Unless you're scared. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. I don't lose. Perfect. I cracked my knuckles. Then you won't mind a bet. He leaned in slightly, intrigued. What kind of bet? I met his gaze. Simple. If I win, I get to find out what kind of neighbor you really are. Ethan's smirk did not waver. And if I win? I swallowed. I already knew where this was going. If I win, he said, voice smooth as hell, you admit you've been thinking about me since the second you moved in. Oh. I blinked. Excuse me? Ethan tilted his head slightly, that smirk getting sharper. You heard me. I did. I just wasn't ready to admit how true it was. I scoffed, shaking my head. You're unbelievable. His eyes flickered with amusement. That a yes? The air felt heavier now. Like the room had shrunk. I should have backed out. Should have said no, thanks, good night, and sent him back to his apartment. But instead, I picked up the deck, shuffled it once, and smirked. Deal. Ethan's grin widened. Like he already knew how this was going to end. Ethan tapped his fingers against the table as I shuffled the deck. Slow. Relaxed. Too relaxed. He was trying to get in my head. I wasn't going to let him. The first few hands went by quickly. No real tells, no obvious bluffs. Just reading each other. I was good at poker. Not great, but good. Ethan? He was a problem. Every time I thought I had him figured out, he'd flip the game on me. His hands were too steady, too calm. His smirk? Unshakable. I hated how much I noticed the way he moved. The way his fingers played with the edge of his cards. The way his jaw flexed when he studied the board. The way he watched me, like he was playing a different kind of game entirely. I leaned back, exhaling. You always this cocky? Ethan chuckled. You always this obvious? I blinked. Obvious? He set his hand down, tilting his head. You keep tapping your thumb when you bluff. I froze. He leaned forward slightly. And you've been watching my hands all night. I swallowed. Was he serious? Ethan just grinned, like he already knew the answer. The next round? Brutal. He played me like a damn instrument. Every move I made, he saw through it. Every bluff? Called out. By the time we hit the last hand, I already knew I was screwed. I stared at my cards. 2 pair. Not bad. I looked at Ethan. His expression gave away nothing. Then he did something that made my brain short-circuit. He licked his lips. Just barely. Just enough for me to notice. And in that split second, I made the worst possible move. All in, I said. Ethan smirked. He knew. He flipped his cards. 3 of a kind. Damn it. He leaned back, stretching his arms over his head. Tough break. I dragged a hand down my face. I can't believe I just lost to you. Ethan chuckled, pushing his cards toward me. "Oh, you were always gonna lose." I exhaled sharply. "All right, fine. You win." His eyes flickered with something wicked. "Which part?" I blinked. "What?" Ethan tilted his head. "The game? Or the fact that you've been thinking about me?" My stomach dropped. I opened my mouth, and nothing came out. Ethan just sat there, waiting. Letting me process it. Letting me decide what happened next. And for the first time all night, I had no idea what my next move was. I couldn't move. The card sat between us, forgotten. The game? Didn't matter anymore. Because now, Ethan was just watching me. Waiting. I swallowed hard, my pulse a mess. He leaned forward slightly, his fingers resting loosely on the table. "Come on," he murmured. "Say it." I scoffed, forcing a laugh. "You wish." Ethan's smirk didn't waver. If anything, it deepened. He knew. He knew that I had no comeback. No escape. And the worst part? I could feel my face getting warm. He noticed. "Oh, this is fun," he said, sitting back. "I knew you were gonna lose, but I didn't expect you to look this guilty about it." I rolled my eyes, gripping the edge of the table. "You're impossible." Ethan tilted his head. "And you're stalling." I clenched my jaw. He wasn't gonna let this go. I should have just admitted it. Should have muttered a quiet "fine, you win," and ended this whole thing before it spiraled into something worse. But for some reason, I didn't. I kept my mouth shut. And that was a mistake. Because Ethan took it as a challenge. His smirk faded slightly, replaced with something else. Something dangerous. He tapped his fingers against the table, slow and deliberate. "All right, new bet." I narrowed my eyes. "What?" Ethan stood up. Too smooth, too confident. He rounded the table, closing the space between us in 3 slow steps. I gripped the arm of my chair. I should have backed away. I didn't. "You lost," he murmured. "So now, I get something else." I stiffened. He leaned down, his hands braced on the sides of my chair, caging me in. I felt my stomach flip, my pulse hammering against my throat. This wasn't happening. This was not happening. "Ethan." "You still thinking too hard," he murmured. His breath was warm against my skin. I froze. And that was when I knew. This wasn't just about the game anymore. And I was completely out of my depth. I couldn't breathe. Ethan was too close. His hands braced on either side of my chair, his body just inches away from mine. I could feel the warmth of his skin, the steady rise and fall of his chest. I should have said something. Anything. But my brain? Completely blank. Ethan tilted his head slightly, his smirk still there, but softer now. "Still thinking too hard," he murmured. I swallowed hard. My pulse hammering. I needed to move. To step back, to break this moment before it got worse. But my body wasn't listening. Because part of me, a very stupid, reckless part, wanted to see what he would do next. Ethan must have noticed. Because his smirk faded completely. His eyes flickered, watching me carefully. Like he was waiting for me to stop him. Like he was waiting for me to say no. But I didn't. I just sat there. And then, he moved. Slow. Deliberate. His fingers brushed against my jaw, light and testing. A barely there touch. I exhaled sharply. Ethan's hand stilled. My breath caught. For a second, asterisk asterisk a long, stretched out second, asterisk asterisk nothing happened. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said it again. Say it. I hesitated. Because if I said it, if I admitted it, there was no turning back. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to keep my voice steady. Maybe. Ethan exhaled, a quiet chuckle escaping his lips. I felt it. Felt the warmth of his breath, felt the space between us shrink even more. Then, before I could talk myself out of it, he leaned in. And this time, I didn't stop him. The second Ethan leaned in, everything changed. The teasing? Gone. The smug, cocky smirk? Nowhere to be found. This wasn't a game anymore. And we both knew it. His fingers tightened at my jaw, barely holding me in place. Not forceful. Not hesitant. Just waiting. Waiting for me to pull away. Waiting for me to stop him. But I didn't. I couldn't. My pulse pounded against my skin, my breath caught in my throat. And then, he closed the distance. It was slow. Deliberate. Like he was making sure I felt every second of it. And when his lips finally brushed against mine, asterisk asterisk light at first, testing, asterisk asterisk it felt like something between us snapped. I leaned in before I could stop myself. Ethan took that as all the confirmation he needed. Because in the next second, his hand slid to the back of my neck, his body pressing closer, his warmth bleeding into mine. The air was thick, heavy, impossible to ignore. I barely noticed when my hands moved on their own, gripping onto his waist, anchoring myself. Ethan sighed against my lips, deepening the moment just slightly, just enough to send a spark straight down my spine. The world outside? Didn't exist. The thin walls? Didn't matter. All I could focus on was this. On him. On the way his touch burned through me, how his body fit against mine too easily, like this had been waiting to happen for a long, long time. And maybe it had. The next thing I knew, we were moving. I wasn't sure who moved first, maybe both of us. But suddenly, we weren't just standing there anymore. Suddenly, he had me pinned against the counter, his hands firm on my waist, my fingers digging into his back. The room felt too hot. Too small. And I didn't care. We should have stopped. We should have taken a second to think. But when Ethan asterisk asterisk pulled back just enough to look at me, his eyes dark, his breathing unsteady, asterisk asterisk I knew one thing for sure. We weren't stopping. Not tonight. Not anymore.